Welcome to another episode of Altitude Advantage. I am your host and team reporter, Elisa Hernandez. Across the table from me is your lead writer on DenverBroncos.com, Aric DiLalla. And the Broncos are coming off another road win, 33-10, Thursday Night Football, primetime game, improved to 3-1 on the road, and a good record, 4-3, going into this home game that we have on Sunday. And when you look back at this game, we had a mini bye week after the game on Sunday. I feel like we can still celebrate a little Dub Day fun on Monday.
Yeah, this is like Dub Day part 2 on Monday. You got the one on Friday, and then it's nice to sit back and relax and watch other teams play on Sunday without having to worry about, are you going to get a win or not?
Yeah.
You know you've got the win. It's locked up. You're just watching other teams, and it's fun. But, yeah, a good performance, even though it was a few days ago now. I thought impressive in that the Broncos went out and did exactly what you're supposed to do, which is find a way to win. There's no excuses in the NFL. Nobody feels sorry for anybody, and the Saints are banged up or were banged up. But the Broncos, they found a way to take advantage. They ran the football well. They played good defense. And really, I said this on Friday morning on our Instant Reaction podcast.
Fancy.
Was that after watching the first 2 drives, which was, the Broncos finding a way to get a field goal, and then the Saints, the Broncos getting a stop there wasn't much worry. There wasn't concern. It felt like the Broncos were in command the entire time, and that's a rarity, I think, in the NFL to watch a game and feel that way, but it was nice to have a stress-free win.
Yeah, Will Lutz was 4 for 4. His longest was 52 yards, I believe. So I think you kind of see that they were kind of falling into, like you said, what we've seen for a good part of the season, all the pauses that we've seen from that. And that was really something that the players focused on following that loss of the Chargers. They were kind of like, this game was not what we're used to doing, and we need to get back to what we're used to doing. We talked a lot about that in the podcast before, where we said, like, it's trying to make the opposing team play to you and not the opposite way. And I feel like the way that the defense was really able to kind of rattle Spencer Rattler, no pun intended.
Pretty good, though. That was nice.
Was able to really kind of get him off balance. 6 sacks. Nick Bonito really kind of coming in as well, getting that 5th sack for 1 sack in every game for the last 5 games. So 5 sacks for him within the last 5 games is pretty impressive.
Yeah, the defense played well, and I think that's what you're looking for, like you said, against a young quarterback. Find a way to get a lead and then let these guys tee off. I think there have been so many times over the last few years where this team has had that defense that I think was capable of doing that, and unfortunately they haven't had an offense that is putting them in position to take advantage of that skill set of being able to pin their ears back and go. And I know the Broncos offense is still working through some things. They're still working and developing. Sean Payton said that Thursday night after the game that, hey, we're taking steps here, but we're still a work in progress. We're still developing. But I think what's been nice is that they're not making these mistakes of putting their defense in a bad position.
Yeah.
And so when they do score, like they did against the Saints, even though it wasn't touchdowns initially, they were still able to get 3 points on a couple of early drives. You're up 6-0. And so then when you do click and you do score a touchdown, now it's 13-0 instead of 7-0, for example. And so then you put your defense in a position where it's the same way, like vice versa. When you're down 23-0 against the Chargers, it's difficult to kind of get something going, or against the Steelers when you're down 13-0, it's difficult to get something going. And the defense made life difficult on Spencer Rattler. And that's the way they want to play is get a lead, let this defense tee off. We'll talk more about it later in this show about if this team has found an identity and a way to win. But I think, and I have some thoughts on that in general, but in this game, stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. But in this game, I was impressed with the way that they played complementary football. And if you look at their wins this year, it's been complementary football, right? Defense, offense, special teams, all doing their job. And it led to another win on Thursday night.
Yeah, 6 sacks, 2 takeaways, 1 TD score. They really kind of made it very hard for the Saints offense to really get in rhythm. One thing that really got in rhythm, which was really good to see, is the run game, which you mentioned. Javonte Williams having his first multi-career rushing TD game, and that's really exciting to see, especially because when you just look back at this season so far, obviously it's still young. We're only 8 weeks. We're going into week 8. Joe Lombardi, offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi, had said, like, it's going to click. The big runs are going to come. And it is hard and frustrating when they're not working when you need them to, but we're going to keep running the ball. The big plays are going to come. The big runs are going to come. We know the guys that we have. And so you kind of see him say that, 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago at this point, and then you have a game like you did on primetime where Javonte Williams was really able to show out his speed, and he wasn't the only one. We'll get to Bo in a second, but just the fact that you've seen the run game develop, especially with Javonte Williams having the game that he had.
Yeah, and in the Broncos wins, whether it's late in the second half against the Jets, if it's against the Raiders, if it was against the Buccaneers way back in week 3, like the Broncos have been at their best when the run game is working. I think it helps Bo Nix out, obviously. And they're going to have to keep relying on Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin. We saw Audric Estime get a little bit more action there, and I think you would think that would continue based on what Sean Payton has said.
Yeah.
But yeah, this and the offensive line, listen, they love running the ball. Any offensive lineman will tell you that they would rather run the football and get ahead of steam and go downhill and punish defensive linemen and linebackers and corners out on the edge than pass block. But this is a team, offensively, this is a team that when they run the ball, they're at their best. It sets up play action. Sean Payton talked Monday about that they do like using this play action passing game. He thinks they use it more than maybe a Pro Football Focus would indicate. And it just gives you a little bit of variety. If you run the ball well, you've got to play closer to the line of scrimmage, and then it opens up the passing game a little bit. And Sean Payton has said many times that any offense is better when it runs the ball well and plays good defense that helps out any quarterback. We'll see as things get going here.
Yeah.
Obviously, a matchup at home with the Carolina Panthers, and then you go on the road to play the Ravens and the Chiefs, two good defenses. And you're going to find out a lot about this Broncos offense, about the running game. But I would say that as the weather gets a little colder, we get into December, running the football and good defense tends to translate. Like those are the characteristics of good late season teams. And so I'm excited to see kind of over the coming weeks how that plays out, but certainly an encouraging performance against the Saints. And I think you saw, especially in the second half, when you get the run game going, you just batter teams down, and you can tell toward the end that they don't want to tackle. They don't want to, it's just a fact of it is like a good run game wears a team down. And it was promising for sure.
Yeah. Well, another thing that's really promising is Bo Nix. I mean, I wrote this stat down because I thought it was very impressive. So he's the first rookie QB with 75-plus rushing yards in a primetime game. Given how many primetime games there have been in the history of the NFL, that's pretty impressive. And I think, at least for me, I was surprised of how fast he really is. Like, we've kind of seen those spurts where he kind of finds his way out of the pocket and really makes a play. But he had a huge run in that game to really set up, I think, Javonte's 1 yard or 2 yard rushing touchdown. But to kind of see that play come into play, he is a lot quicker than I would anticipate, especially when you're going into that live game action.
Yeah, and faster than the Broncos even thought when they drafted him. Sean Payton talked about that Monday, that he's a little faster than they thought when they selected him out of Oregon. And also his athleticism, his mobility, I think you see it in different ways. There's the ability to avoid sacks. And, we saw that against the Chargers where he's ducking under a sack and he's taken off for 20-plus yards. You see that, I think it was against, it might have been the Broncos' first field goal. Bo avoided another sack, was able to get a couple of yards, and instead of a 56-yard field goal, it's a 46-yard field goal. So the ability to make those plays kind of off schedule is a big element of it. But then there's also this ability to call these design runs, and it just gets the defense thinking for an extra second. It makes them account for one more player in the run game, which essentially gives you an advantage as an offense. And we saw it on that 32-yarder, like you mentioned, that set up the touchdown. That wasn't an RPO, because they are calling some RPOs where the Broncos, where Bo Nix is able to kind of choose, am I handing it off here? Am I throwing it quickly? But then there's also the design runs where he's going off the left tackle and scampers for 32 yards. He takes a little bit of contact. I would love to see him avoid some of those hits there at the end. Just you want him to stay healthy, obviously. But it does give you another element. And I think, as Sean Payton said Monday, third down, red zone, it helps out, gives you some flexibility. So that was another key takeaway, I think, from Thursday night is just the passing game. I think we saw good strides, and the internet wants to focus on the bad plays. And I know there's a play where the ball lands between Lucas Kroll and Troy Franklin there. He had the one that, and he said after the game, the throw to Tyrann Mathieu that should have been picked off. Like, there's some throws that need to be cleaned up, but then there's also, you see some throws that are on target, on time. Yeah. And as he grows and develops, I think the fact that he can use the running game to kind of supplement the passing game is a trait that's going to serve him well and serve this offense well. And, obviously you want to see consistent growth in the passing game too, but the fact that he has the run game to rely on is helpful for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest things when it comes to this team is the accountability of those mistakes or those kind of passes that you kind of want back or things like that. That's one thing that this team does not shy away from is that accountability. And I feel like that really kind of ties into the way they've been able to bounce back and be resilient, especially when they're facing like adversity like this or going into this game, first primetime game, all those things. And it was a big game. I mean, obviously, we have Sean Payton returning back. He has now beaten every team in the NFL as a head coach, which is a milestone that not many can say that they have done. And all week, the players have been very modest about, we're going to win this for us. We want to improve to 4-3. But you can see after the game and the Dub Day pictures that they really wanted to win this for Sean Payton, especially on the biggest stage, like a primetime game, going back to New Orleans where he spent a bulk of his career. So being there with the crowd noise, how do you say this team really rallied around that? And just that notion, that narrative of being able to really kind of produce on the field?
Yeah, I think not just New Orleans, but as we kind of look back to the first 7 weeks of this season, I think one of the things that stands out to me is that this team is gritty. They are resilient. They've found ways to respond. And last year, obviously, they started 1-5. They got in a hole, and they were able to climb out of it. But it just took so much mental energy, I think, to climb out of 1-5. Whereas this year, you're 0-2. As Sean Payton said, it's not a rut. He wasn't concerned about kind of where the team was. It was a couple of one-possession losses to, in Seattle, Bo Nix's first start. That's a tricky game. I would love to see if those teams could play like this week, what that game would look like.
That was a tough way to start the season.
It was a tough way.
Yeah.
For sure.
You have Seattle and that crowd noise. But then it's like it's almost preparing you for a moment like this where I can only imagine, how loud that must have felt for him.
Yeah, it was definitely loud early. I think the way the Broncos played took the crowd out of it, and certainly...
Which you called that on our preview podcast for that game. You said that the crowd needed to be taken out.
Yeah, and they took him out, and they took him out, and they sent him home. I mean, it was empty there toward the end of the game. So,
ooh, the sass.
No sass. But no, I just think that this team has an ability to respond that is reflective of its coach. And over the last 7, 8, 9 years, wherever you want to draw that line, the Broncos have struggled, I think, to avoid these long losing streaks, to bounce back from a loss, to not let one loss become two. I think back to 2021 where they start 3-0 and then boom, they lose 4 in a row, or you lose 8 straight way back in 2017. I mean, there's just been times, or 2022 where they start 2-1 and you have this win over the 49ers, and then instead of building off it, you kind of get stuck on this skid. This team, and like you said, it's early. We're still only about halfway through the year, not even. But I think you're starting to see that this team has an ability to respond. There's a little bit of grit about it. There's kind of that something extra that I think is important for a team that's looking to make the playoffs. And so that stands out to me as when I look back at the first 7 weeks of like, what are the takeaways? That one stands out as a big one, just this mental resilience. And it's a tougher team than maybe they've been in the past. And that's a really good sign. I think one of the other ones is that they're not just winning some of these football games, but against the Bucs, against the Raiders, against the Saints, they're blowing teams out.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really good sign in terms of like, people talk about record, they're 4-3, but one of the more telling stats generally is point differential. And you look at the Colts, for example, they have the same record as the Broncos. Their point differential, I think, is 6. Broncos is like 39, I believe. And so that speaks to, hey, the Broncos are playing good football, and there's a chance they could be 5-2 right now, or and so that I think is also a good sign of. I asked Zach Allen after the game in New Orleans, what does this say about the team's potential? And he talked about, we know when we're playing complementary football, all 3 units, we can be a really good football team.
Yeah.
And
they've showed it.
They've showed it. I think they've already surprised people in terms of what they've done this year. And some of it is that grit and mental toughness. Some of it is just the style of football they play. But yeah, those are 2 of some of the early takeaways.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because before the team left to New Orleans, I talked to Vance Joseph, defensive coordinator Vance Joseph, and I asked him, what is it about prime time that just kind of brings the best out of players? And he talked about, well, your family's watching, you're the only game that's on, like all eyes are on you, the spotlights are on you, and that really can elevate a team to that level. And it's like, well, hello world, this is Cody Barton. He's gonna get a 52-yard fumble return touchdown for this team, and you kind of see Twitter exploded in that way. And it's really interesting because obviously me and you are here every day. We're watching practice. We're going to the games. We're really hands-on here. And so when you see the nation get exposed to what this defense can do in particular, and what Vance Joseph is able to do in particular, I think that's been really special as well.
Yeah, and this defense, as you look at the first 7 weeks of the season, I mean, think of some of the highlights right from the first 7 weeks. If you go to denverbroncos.com, we put together the top 10 offensive plays, top 10 defensive plays from the first 7 weeks.
Broncos weekend, make sure you guys watch that on YouTube.
Check that out too.
Yeah, with Steve Atwater and Orlando Franklin, we broke down our favorite moments from the past 6 weeks.
Plug.
Name drop.
But there's some impressive defensive moments in particular. If you go back and look at Pat Surtain's 100-yard pick six, 2 safeties against Seattle, Cody Barton's touchdown against the Saints, PJ Locke's sack of Aaron Rodgers in New York, like that defensive performance. This has been really impressive. And with the exception of like the third quarter in Seattle and maybe the first couple of quarters against the Chargers, it's been pretty consistent, right? It hasn't been this up and down roller coaster. It's just been pretty dominant defense for the Broncos have played 7 football games. That's 28 quarters. Like 25 of the 28 quarters have been really dang good.
Lights out, yeah.
And so, I came into this season wondering, what is this defense going to look like? Obviously, they started last year slow. Yeah. And then even during parts of last year, when they were playing well, it was really turnover dependent, right? Like if they weren't forcing turnovers, and Zach Allen said this earlier this year, if they weren't forcing turnovers, they were still giving up a bunch of yards and points, and it was really dependent on, can we force takeaways, and if not, we're going to give up scores. This year, they're still forcing turnovers, but even if they're not, they're forcing 3-and-outs, they're forcing punts, they're getting off the field, and it's like they've taken it to a new level. Yeah. And I just was curious coming into the year, like, what is this going to look like? Are they going to be able to hold up, especially with, a rookie quarterback that's probably going to put them in tricky situations at times, which we've seen. And for the most part, this defense has done its job and then some. They're a big reason why this team has won 4 of its last 5 games. I think you look at 4-3, right? And you're like, okay, they're basically 500, but then you're like, well, they've won 4 of the last 5. Yeah. Right? Like it's
3-1 on the road.
3-1 on the road. Yeah. Like that's been impressive. I think it's since 2015, I think I saw the stat, is the last time the Broncos won 3 consecutive road games, which is how they've started this year. And a lot of that is that defense travels, and it's also the guys who are doing it, right? You've got Pat Surtain, who's a first-round pick, but then no other first-round picks on the entire defense. You've got like Alex Singleton, one of your emotional leaders, goes down after week 3, and you think, okay, well, is this defense going to take a step back? And no, they, Justin Sternad steps in. Quan Alexander against the Saints steps in. You've got Riley Moss playing at a really high level. Yeah. You've got a defensive line that is, Zach Allen is finally getting some respect nationally, and
Yeah.
I think J.J. Watt said he'd be on his All-Pro ballot right now through 7 weeks. And this defense is getting some attention. And I just think that there was a lot of questions. There was a lot of pressure on this defense to play well and play well quickly.
Yeah.
And they've lived up to it right away. And so when you look back at the first 7 weeks, the defense is another storyline. It's that grit and resilience. It's the defense. It's winning these kind of blowing teams out at times. And then the last one, of course, is Bo Nix.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like I'm just looking at some of these numbers from the game on Thursday, and this defense kept the Saints to 5-17 on third down efficiency, obviously 2 turnovers, and kept them under 97 yards. I kept them under 100 yards, 97 yards rushing, compared to 225 rushing yards for the Broncos. So it is impressive to kind of see this team do it. And I think what impressed me the most as well is this was a short week, and you're coming off of that loss to the Chargers, and that locker room kept saying, like, it's a short week, we're going to flush this down, we're going to turn the page, we're going to get back to what we do. And for them to do it quickly, for them to do it in a dominant way, because the Saints didn't score until that late touchdown, I believe, in the fourth. So it's like for you to keep it out of their reach for the entirety of the game, obviously that touchdown at the end, but for them to kind of turn that page quickly and really kind of bounce back in this way, what does that say about this team, given, like you said, like the past seasons that they've been able to maybe turn that page a little slower?
Yeah, I think that, again, it shows the just the mental grit and resilience of this team. And I also think it shows that the offense at Bo Nix has helped them enough to win football games. And I think you haven't always seen Bo start off fast, but I think as games go along, he gets better and better, makes some big time plays. And that's encouraging, that as you see a rookie quarterback grow over the course of the season, I think we'll continue to see him grow. Like, he's getting better at processing. He's getting better at identifying blitzes at the line of scrimmage. He's finding ways to settle in and making plays with his feet and making plays through the air. And so when you pair that with a great defense and then a young quarterback that is he's not throwing interceptions. I think he's got 1 interception since week 2. Like, that's really encouraging.
Yeah.
He's generally avoiding sacks.
Yep.
And then he's finding the moments where he makes plays.
He's not causing negative plays either. Like,
right.
Yeah.
There's times where, sure, the Broncos would love to be a little bit better on third down.
Yeah.
But their red zone percentage is much better than it was a year ago. Their goal-to-go offense is better than it was a year ago. And so they're finding ways in these key situations to make plays, and that's really encouraging, and I think a sign of what's to come, really.
Well, talking about these other rookies, Troy Franklin, a couple other guys have really gotten in the mix lately. Sean Payton talked about Troy Franklin a little bit during the press conference on Monday. But what have you kind of seen the way these rookies are stepping out? You said Audric Esme got some touches there, and I believe after the Chargers game, he had said, like, look, we're all just here to do what we can. And Garrett Bowles had a lot to say about these rookies, just saying, like, look, these young guys are keeping me young, and they're giving me motivation to not only, take them under my wing and give them advice from the veteran perspective, but also learning from their grit and learning from their resiliency to kind of really rally the guys around them. So what can you say about these other rookies that are coming in and really kind of making their mark little by little?
Yeah, and I think you'll continue to see these guys make more of an impact as the season goes along. It just feels natural that the more you get settled in, the more impact you're going to have on the field. I think from Jonah Ellis, who has a couple of sacks already this season, he's one of those guys providing pressure on the defense. 12 different guys have a sack so far, and Jonah Ellis is right up there. He's got 2 or 3 on the season, and he's also had some plays where, like on the Surtain pick 6 against the Raiders, he's in Gardner Minshew's face, and it's probably the reason that Surtain gets an interception. So sometimes these guys make plays that don't show up on the stat sheet. Audric Esme coming back from IR, he, I think, has a lot of potential, broke through for a couple of big runs against the Saints. Troy Franklin, I think, was a little bit slower to come on in training camp. Like, Devon Vele was the guy making all those plays back in August. But I think the more and more we see Troy out there, the better and better he's gotten. I think there was a sense, especially as a rookie, that maybe he was just going to be that deep play threat, and like, you're just going to chuck it up to Troy deep. And they've tried to do that a couple times, but against the Chargers and against the Saints, you saw him get involved a little bit more in that intermediate game. He's open a lot. And I who knows if that's his speed, who knows if that's the scheme, or what that can be attributed to. But I think you saw against the Saints, there were times where he was just, there's nobody within 10 yards of him, and he's just sitting in a spot waiting for the ball. So that's really good to see. I'm excited to see how Troy Franklin continues to progress. I mentioned Devon Vele. He has some run after the catch ability that I think is pretty impressive. He feels like a steal based on where the Broncos got him in the draft. And then, we'll just continue to see how some of these other rookies progress. Does Chris Abrams-Drain get some run at some point? Like there's some other guys that I think could end up being contributors. But when you look at Troy Franklin, Vele, Ellis, and now Estime, I think that's a good core group. And that's without mentioning, of course, Bo, who is like, when we talk about the rookies, I feel like we leave Bo out because it's like there's like a Bo category, and then there's an everybody else category. But yeah, those rookies are impressive. I think they've contributed quite a bit early and are providing a reason to be excited, not just about this year, but about the future. And I think it also plays into, I know we wanted to talk a little bit about this Broncos identity, but it kind of plays into that identity as well. Yeah.
I mean, that was going to be my next question to you is like, do you believe that this team has kind of found its identity? We've chipped away. I feel like we've put into a little box all the things that we've seen, resiliency and accountability and grit and kind of those things. But when you look at the overall team, the big picture, what do you kind of see the way that this team is able to form this identity, especially with these young guys? Like you said, like on a defense where Pat Surtain is really your number one, draft pick kind of guy, and everyone else is like just those hardworking, coming in, making plays, and making their way in the NFL.
Yeah, I think obviously right now the team is winning with defense, running the football, and making timely plays. And I think that Sean Payton talked about that on Monday, and he said, listen, any championship football team has that ability to play good defense and run the football and then make key plays in the passing game. And so it sounds a little bit like, of course that's an identity of a good football team, but the fact of the matter is the Broncos have shown an ability to do that, and not every team has shown that ability. And so the fact that the Broncos can do that, again, I want to see, can they keep that identity against the Ravens, against the Chiefs? They go to Cincinnati in December. Like, what does that look like when they get to that point? Atlanta, which has an explosive offense, what do they look like when Atlanta comes here? But at the same time, like the fact that you can play that way, you're forcing turnovers, you're running the football, you're wearing teams down. That's encouraging in terms of, like, so much of the NFL to me is, can you beat the teams you're supposed to beat? Can you steal one from like a team or two that maybe you're not favored in? And then in all the toss-up games, there's a bunch of toss-up games. Can you win like 60% of those, right? Like can you just get an edge there? And if you do that...
Way to break the NFL down
it's like three types of games. It's teams you should beat, teams that you could beat, and then teams that maybe you're not expected to beat. And if you can win those games against teams that you should beat, and then get just a little bit of an edge in the teams you can beat, and steal one or two in the teams that maybe you're not favored to beat. Like, there's no reason the Broncos can't beat the Ravens, for example. But, like, that will be a game that I would imagine they'll go into as underdogs because the Ravens have the reigning MVP. They've been to an AFC championship. They've got a really good...
They've turned the page because they started, they struggled at the end, and they've been able to kind of find their rhythm, too. So that's a different matchup, to your point where you said, like, you almost wish that Bo and this defense, this run game would face the Seahawks and the Steelers now, like if you flip it.
I mean, those would certainly be fun games to watch at this point, I think, and I'd be interested to see how those play out, and maybe you end up in a game down the road against the Steelers or something, who knows. But I think what's impressive about this team is that the teams that they've, quote unquote, should have beaten, like in that first bucket, I think you would put the Saints and probably the Raiders, even though they'll face them on the road, which is a different challenge. But like the way those teams were beat up, you should have beaten those teams. And they left no doubt. I know they were down 10-0 early against the Raiders, but then they flipped the switch and it was dominant after that. There was never a doubt against New Orleans. Then you look at some of these toss-up games and you think, okay, like Is the Jets a toss-up game? Like maybe, but I would also put the Jets kind of, at least at that point, on the road, and the Buccaneers, like in that bucket of you can beat these teams, and they stole a couple of those. And so now coming up, you've got, I just feel better about the Broncos' chances to win almost all of those games that, quote unquote, you should win, and then steal some, win the majority. Like, I just feel good about beating the teams that you should beat, because in the past we've seen, like I think back to 2021, Broncos go on the road, get a big win against the Cowboys. They come home, they face a 3-5 Eagles team, I think 3-6, and it was a game you should win, and the Broncos did not win. They laid an egg. Or like in 2018, they got off to a good start, had the winless Giants here, and they lose. And it's like you can't build toward the playoffs, and you can't take the next step as a team if you lose those games. And so, and we'll talk about the Panthers here in a second, but I just feel like in terms of identity, when you can run the ball, play good defense, and not turn the ball over, like that's something else the Broncos are doing well, is protecting the football. Is they're not beating themselves. And so many teams in the NFL, Elisa, if you watch week to week, it's like more teams beat themselves than there are teams that go out and win it. And so if the Broncos can put themselves in that category of we're not going to beat ourselves, you're going to win a lot of football games. And I think that's their identity right now, of like they're not beating themselves. They're playing solid, clean football. They're making plays when they need to. And it's worked out for them so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's those gritty wins, not afraid to do the dirty work, everyone kind of next man up mentality. To me, I think what really speaks volumes of this team is the way they were able to bounce back after two things. One, when Alex Singleton went down, and then two, when Pat Surtain II went down. Like, those are two key leaders, two key captains on this defense that went down, and the way that they were able to respond, and like you said, Riley Moss playing at the level that he's playing, and just kind of really having a really effective game to leave no doubt against a team that you should beat, because a lot of things come into play, whether it's emotions or schemes or game plan, whatever it is. Any given Sunday, we talk about that all the time. But they went out there knowing that on a short week, losing one of their captains, a really big anchor point in their defense with Pat, and then to go out and be as dominant as they are, I think that really kind of continues to add to this identity of being like, look, like we're the gritty next man up mentality. Again, we're gonna be in your face. We're gonna give your quarterback a really hard time, and then we're gonna run the ball as hard as we can. And then obviously our quarterback is gonna do what he can, both in the rushing and passing, because Bo did have some impressive passes, impressive runs in that game. So as we kind of look ahead to Carolina, big picture, the last home game of October, head coach Sean Payton spoke about that in terms of, winning on the road is great. Winning at home needs to be a priority, especially because they've been really starting slow at home. So when you kind of have that, how do you kind of turn that page to protect home field? Because I feel like Payton was really stressing the fact that they need to do that.
Yeah, and Sean Payton's always talked about, like, good teams win on the road, good teams win at home, good teams win in primetime, good teams win at 1 p.m. Like, good teams win and bad teams don't. And so, like, you almost know at this point when you ask Sean Payton, what does it take to win on Thursday? What does it take to win on Sunday night? Like
the same thing it does every week.
Good teams win those games, and good teams tend to have good records.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something to be said for you just need to take care of business at home, and 3-1 on the road is great, and we'll see if the Broncos can keep that up. It would be a huge boon to their chances if they can, steal one against Baltimore and Kansas City, or certainly they'll need to go on the road and beat the Raiders, for example.
Right.
And then late in the year, you've got road games against the Chargers and Bengals. Like, you're probably going to need one, if not both of those, right?
Yeah.
And so they need to continue to win on the road. But if you look at this home schedule coming up, the Broncos are 4-3. They've got the Panthers, and we'll talk about them in just a second. But, like, Panthers, Falcons, Browns, who are struggling.
Another primetime game. It's going to be Monday Night Football.
Yeah, exactly. And then the Colts and Chiefs. Like, you might need to win the remainder of your home games if you want to put yourself in position to make the playoffs, because probably takes, we talk a lot about 10 wins. Not impossible to make it with 9, but 10 is always kind of where you start, right? And so you've just got to start like building this expectation that when we're at home, we're going to win. We're going to find a way to come out on top. And it is important that I think, especially at home, you build an early lead, you let the crowd get into it, and then this defense can get after opposing quarterbacks. And like we've seen over the last few years, when they do play well at home, like against the Raiders this year, against the Browns last year, when it gets loud and a team is trailing, you can really just like kind of turn the clamps and put the game out of reach. But you're right, they've got to start faster at home. I think they've got a good chance against the Panthers here. Obviously, they're struggling. They just had a tough loss against the Commanders, who didn't even have Jaden Daniels for much of the game. But there's also this, and you probably, based on like the Vegas odds and all that, would put this in a bucket of you should win this football game.
Yeah.
But as you said, it's the NFL. It's a week-to-week league. If you don't come in ready to go, they'll find a way to upset you, and then you're going to look back and regret this one. And so Sean Payton said Monday, we've got to keep the focus on ourselves. There's still a lot that we can be better at. You talk about, being better at home, starting faster, being good against the run defensively, avoiding turnovers. All those things play into it. But, like, I don't care what the record is of the Panthers. You better be ready to go because any team can beat you, and you don't want to look back when you're in the midst of the AFC playoff race and say, man, we should have been able to beat this team. And instead you find that, you made some mistakes or you overlooked them or whatever it might be. Like,
you don't want to
end up in that
You
position.
don't want a star to be born out of a game, like, because that happens sometimes. Like, then like the momentum kind of comes, but it's like a star is born because they just had a really good game against the team, and then you're like, this person shouldn't have had that kind of game against this defense or this offense, et cetera. So I think you make a good point there because, it is a home game. These players do take a lot of pride in winning in front of Broncos country. They do take it hard when they don't win in front of Broncos country. And I know that is a focal point that they kind of are really kind of leaning into. And fun fact, Sunday will be the Vamos Broncos game, which is always fun at the stadium, obviously in celebration of Hispanic heritage. But I think when you have the fans are already into it. When there's a theme game, they're even more into it. And then when you give them something to cheer about, it's hard to play here. Obviously our podcast is called Altitude Advantage because they do have that advantage. And one of my favorite videos that they play at the stadium is that when they really focus, guys with, getting air and all those things, because it is hard to play here. And I think that's one of the focal points they want to remind, it is hard to play here, but we this is our home. We win here.
Yeah. And that's gotta be the standard, right? And that's how it was. You think of when this team won back-to-back Super Bowls. Like, they won the most games at home in a 3-year stretch in NFL history at that time. And you think back to when Manning and that team was really rolling, it was hard to come here and win football games. It was all about home field advantage in the playoffs because you had to go to New England. It was going to be tough to make it to the Super Bowl. If you went to, if you hosted the Patriots here, obviously the Broncos beat them twice and went to a pair of Super Bowls. Being here means something. The Broncos have to get back to that. They've got to redevelop that home field advantage, the expectation that they're going to win, the doubt in other teams' minds that, man, are we going to be able to go into Denver and win? That's as much part of it, too. Yeah. And I think if you're able to get off to a fast start kind of for the second consecutive week, go ahead on the Panthers, seems like it's going to be Andy Dalton, force him to go up against this pass rush. Obviously made a couple of mistakes against Washington last week. Put him in uncomfortable situations. You're going to get this crowd rolling, and then you've got a chance to get another win and take your next step. But there cannot be, after this week, Elisa, we go on the road to Baltimore, Kansas City. Yeah. There cannot be any looking ahead if you're this team to we've got the Ravens next. It's got to be, the focus has to be entirely on Carolina. It's got to be entirely on finding a way to earn this win. And really, I think it's an opportunity, leave no doubt about this win, right? This is a chance to make a statement about who you are, who you're going to be the rest of the year. And I'm excited to watch, but focus has to be entirely on Carolina. Do not overlook them and be ready to go.
Yeah, Payne talked about that on Monday where he said that mindset comes from inward. Inwardly, these players have to be focused and to not overlook an opponent and just not get caught up in the fact that they bounce back, won in prime time, all the lights, glamours, obviously Payne going back. It's okay, just the way you flushed that Chargers game, now it's time to you celebrate the win, had a mini bye week, and now it's time to really go all in on Carolina. I think that's something that I really do like about Payton and the way, like you said, like his way of doing things rubbing off on this team where it's like, we won, it's great, celebrate, but the next opponent is the top priority. And that's how we have to kind of keep chugging along as you kind of go to the season, because it is easy to overlook teams, especially the ones that are struggling, and just kind of be hyped in like, well, we have the Ravens are next, and then Kansas City, and they're on the road, and Kansas City is playing this way. And it's like, well, a lot can happen from now to that Kansas City game. A lot can happen from now to the Ravens game, but you have to look at what's in front of you in Carolina, and that's a game that can get away from you, or that's a game that you can go out and show like, no, look at us stringing wins together, which you said many times on the pod, like it's all about just stringing 2-3 wins together at a time so that the losses don't hurt as much.
Yeah, you can't go one and then one and then one. Like you gotta find a way to go like
no ping pong back and forth.
Get 2 and then lose 1, or get 3 and like you've got to find a way to do that. I'm hopeful that the experience last year with a winning record and like being in the hunt, that's helpful for some of these guys. But we'll have to see. I'm excited. We'll talk way more about the Panthers on our Thursday show, but I'm excited to see kind of where this goes. It's been a good first 7 weeks. I know it hasn't been perfect. There's been moments that certainly games or moments that the Broncos want back, but I think from where the expectations were and, coming in with a rookie quarterback, he's now gotten 7 weeks of invaluable reps, seems to be improving pretty much every week. And this team is in position with a rookie quarterback, a lot of dead cap, all those sort of things, more injuries than they had a year ago to be in this thing. And so they've got to keep it going, but I'm excited to see what they can do. Yeah.
The fact that Bo has a chance to win 5 games this year or like, as a rookie, like that's hard to do in the NFL. And like you said, it hasn't been perfect, but I think the strides that this team has made from week 1 to now has been really impressive. So again, that game on Sunday is going to be a lot of fun to be a part of, and we're going to get into all that fun stuff on Thursday's podcast. So we appreciate you guys tuning into this edition of Altitude Advantage. Once again, I am your host and team reporter, Elisa Hernandez. Across from me, lead writer for DenverBroncos.com, and our historian, our coach. You're going to get new nicknames every single week because the knowledge you be dropping, he drops bars. We're going to drop the mic on this episode, so make you guys subscribe, put your comments, your questions, so we can read those on Thursday's podcast. And again, we appreciate you listening and watching.